Hello, my name is Aniska and welcome to my channel. Now, on this week's video, I'm going to talk about something a little bit different, which is limiting beliefs. It's something that I see all the time out there on Instagram, YouTube, Facebook, anywhere you go, you hear about limiting beliefs and overcoming your limiting beliefs. And I want to talk today about this with a slightly different lens because I'm coming from the Jungian psychology side of things, and how I kind of help clients work with this, because I think we all have limiting beliefs, whether we're aware of them or not, whether that's what we call them or not. But I think we all have things that we think, well, that's just how it is. I'm just not this, I'm just not that, etc. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about one that I've had to work through later on in the video, but it could be anything from a sort of vocal perspective from, for example, I'm just not a public speaker. I just don't have a powerful voice. I just have a quiet voice. No one listens to me. No one takes me seriously. People talk over me. And so if we believe those, then that's really what we see in the world. I mean, we really see what we believe. And if it doesn't make sense to us, it's because it's unconscious to us. So in the personal development world, we often hear about if you can just overcome your limiting beliefs, then you can really create the life of your dreams. You can have money, you can have the relationships that you want, the health, the business, the career, etc., etc. And what we're taught as well, if we follow that model, is that if we just tell ourselves the opposite enough times and go out there and act as if, eventually we will become a public speaker. If our limiting belief is, I'm not a public speaker, let's say, and we just tell ourselves enough times, I am a public speaker, whether we write it in a journal, whether we say it out loud to ourselves in front of a mirror, whether we record it on an audio and listen to it, however we get that into our brain, eventually, I'm a public speaker now, and then we go out and we act as if. Now, that is great to a point. I think it's much better to do that than do nothing, but I still feel we're working on the ego level. We're working on that surface level, and we're missing out on really the gold that sits underneath that, because there's a reason why we've decided we're not a public speaker, and it's much deeper than what you may think. And actually, if we can examine that and explore that, and importantly, integrate that from a Jungian perspective, then really we're free to create. We're really free to be the greatest public speaker in the world, if that's what we want to do. I'm using that as an example, but hopefully this will start to make sense the more I go through this video. So there's a couple of reasons I don't put too much focus on this sort of, let's call it ego story, this limiting belief. Firstly, because by definition, we're aware of it. So if we're aware of it, it's not actually really driving us. It's driving us to some extent, but not really driving us, because it's what we're not conscious of that's really driving our life. And what the ego really fears is us actually delving deeper and exploring something that we're really afraid to look at. It doesn't have to be bad. It could be that we're really afraid of success. It could be we're really afraid of being in the limelight, or it could be we're really afraid of being criticized or being laughed at or being ridiculed. It depends on the person, and we all, come from this with different perceptions. But essentially, the ego is trying to protect us from something, some emotion that we're trying to avoid feeling. So when we buy into this limiting belief, it means we don't have to go towards that uncomfortable part of ourselves that we've really kind of buried and we're not probably even aware of. And Jung calls this the shadow. And so this is a big part of how I help clients work through their quote unquote limiting beliefs. Secondly to this is, as I've sort of mentioned already, it's this idea that there's something so much deeper that's driving this limiting belief. And I'll give you an example of this. So for example, if you have a limiting belief that people don't listen to you. Now, I hear this a lot, particularly with the clients that I work with. They feel they're not heard. They feel people talk over them, that no one listens to them. And one of the first questions I always ask them, which they're always a bit confused by maybe, is why don't you want to be heard? Because we get so wrapped up in the story of no one's listening to me. And because that's what we really believe, then that's what we see in the world. And it appears that people aren't listening to us. But actually, on some level that we haven't probably explored, because there's something a lot deeper going on here, we actually don't want to be listened to. There's something very uncomfortable about us being listened to. Now, there could be a million reasons for that. Maybe we're uncomfortable with the limelight. Maybe, we fear we've got nothing really of interest to say. So we'd have to explore that. That would be a very personal response. But if we have this limiting belief that people don't want to listen to us, then we have to look at why we don't want to be listened to, because that's really going to set us free, rather than just pushing the opposite away and telling ourselves, people listen to me, people want to listen to me. I mean, that's great, but that will only get us so far. And our mind is really clever. Our ego is really clever. So it will just project that out onto other people. And so it will really appear like no one's listening to us, because then we don't have to look at ourselves, because we're so focused on it being outside of us and being external to us. So it's very, very clever what our mind does to protect us, because there's something about us being heard. Again, I'm just using this as an example, which is a threat to our persona, which is a threat to our emotional survival. But using myself as an example, so I mentioned at the beginning that I used to, well, most of my life, let's just say, it's only really been in the last 12 months. So most of my life, I have really bought into this belief that I'm not a songwriter. And my ego had very, very good reasons for me believing this and really buying into this story that I wasn't a songwriter. I'd never written a song before. I don't have any sort of formal musical education, so I don't have a music degree. I'd done grade 5 music theory, but I wasn't particularly skilled on any instrument. I have now obviously up-leveled a lot with the piano, but for years I sort of played the piano a bit, but not really seriously. So I didn't feel like I was really a musician. I didn't really feel like I had songwriting skills. I'd never written a song before. I just really saw songwriting as something that was someone else, just other people do that, but not me. So what I really came to understand through doing this individuation journey myself using Jungian psychology was actually me stepping into being a songwriter was really about as vulnerable as it gets. It's really opening yourself up to being criticized, to being exposed. It's really, really vulnerable. It's so much easier to sing other people's songs, because if people don't like them, you can say, well, I didn't write the song. I didn't write the lyrics. I didn't write the music. Yes, they might criticize your voice or they might criticize your interpretation, but they're not really fully criticizing you because it's not your song. But if you write the whole song and you're singing it, and in my case, playing the piano, like I bring in a string quartet and I hire someone to write string charts. But other than that, I'm doing the whole song myself. There is really no one to blame but myself. The buck stops with me if people don't like my music. And I realized that had been what really held me back. Coupled with that, this whole idea that I didn't really see myself as a musician because I didn't have a music degree. And I knew I wanted to work with really good musicians if I was going to create music, which I do. And I had to just really get over myself and just own the fact that, yeah, I don't have a music degree and actually I'm willing to learn. And so really for the last 12 months, I've spent an enormous amount of time both working by myself, but also working with teachers, amazing teachers, to really help me up level in my piano and also my vocal skills as well, even though I've been singing most of my life. But that's just an example. And I really bought into that story because me buying into that story kept me safe. It stopped me really having to be more vulnerable, to be more visible, and to really be more potentially exposed. And I think I really feared the criticism that could come back. But actually, another part of this, I would say too, and for me, certainly, you can apply this to whatever your thing is in the world, but I think for me too, I always had in the back of my mind, even though I've never written a song before, once I started the process and I allowed myself to go there, this was one of the things I was always meant to be doing. And I think I always say to my clients as well, when they come and work with me, I'll always say, well, what's your why? Why are you doing this? Why do you want to develop your voice? There has to be a bigger why, I believe, because otherwise the ego will always get its like hooks in and try and pull you back. But I think if you have a bigger why you're doing this, and for me, it was just like, this is what I'm meant to be doing on this planet. This is one of the things I'm here to do, as well as helping people with their voice. It's actually sharing my own music and my own voice with the world. So this was a huge, like, transformation for me on so many levels, really coming to terms with allowing myself to be really vulnerable and visible in a way I'd never been before, but also having to kind of up level and step up and surround myself with incredible musicians in like one of the greatest recording studios in London. Like it really was, I put myself in situations where I was around amazing people because I wanted to really up level. But 5 years ago, even probably 2 years ago, I wouldn't have done it. I would have been too scared. And it's really only been this sort of deeper work that's really transformed this whole journey for me. So I hope that kind of inspires you. Apply that to whatever it is that you're doing in the world, but really know that the limiting belief is just the surface. It's the surface story. There's something so much deeper underneath. And as I say, the easiest way to kind of explore it, well, there's two ways actually. One, which I've already sort of mentioned, is, let's say you know your limiting belief is I just have a quiet voice. Well, ask yourself, why don't I want a powerful voice? Why? Or if your limiting belief is no one listens to me, ask yourself, why don't I want to be listened to? Really start to bring it back to ourselves, because the ego pushes everything out, projects everything out onto other people. And then the other way you can look at this too is to look at the kinds of people that trigger you, because we're always seeing our own mind in the world. So if you get triggered by really loud, domineering people, let's say, or really aggressive people, and I'm making this up, but this is just an example, but let's say perhaps you get triggered by those types of people and your story is I just have a quiet voice, but you're getting triggered by very loud, domineering, aggressive people. There's something about being perceived like that you're running away from and that you really fear. So those people that we get triggered by are really our greatest lesson, because they're showing us a part of ourselves that we've pushed into our shadow, that we don't want to look at, that actually we need to integrate a part of that to really allow ourselves to really shine and blossom. And from a vocal perspective, really allow ourselves to access every color of dynamic and tone and range and all that kind of richness in the voice that's possible. But it's always, we're always going to see it outside of ourselves, and it's always about bringing it back to us, which is the hardest thing, because we all want to blame the world outside of us for why we feel the way we do. But I hope that that's perhaps given you a new way of looking at this, and I will put the questions below in the description box. But of course, if you have any questions, please do comment below. I'd love to know what your thoughts are. But until the next video, I'll see you then.